The ballroom at the Fairmont Grand in downtown San Francisco sparkled with all the pretense money could buy. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across marble floors, while a string quartet played softly in the corner. 20-year high school reunion banners hung from the ceiling in our old-school colors, navy and gold, and everywhere I looked, former classmates mingled in designer clothes, flashing wedding rings and business cards like weapons. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I stood near the entrance in my best suit, which wasn't saying much. The charcoal gray fabric had seen better days, and I'd bought it 3 years ago at Men's Warehouse during a clearance sale. My shoes were polished but worn, and my watch was the same Timex I'd owned since college. I felt like an imposter walking into a movie set where everyone else had been given the script except me. Minumai. The reunion committee had really outdone themselves. Ice sculptures of our old mascot, the Eagles, stood guard at each corner of the room. Tables were draped in silk, each centerpiece worth more than my monthly rent. A full bar stretched along the back wall, staffed by professionals in crisp white shirts who moved with the efficiency of people accustomed to serving the wealthy. I recognized faces immediately, though most had been transformed by 2 decades of success, cosmetic procedures, and the confidence that comes from never having to check your bank balance before buying groceries. There was Jennifer Hayes, now apparently Jennifer Hayes Morrison based on her name tag, wearing what looked like a designer gown that cost more than my car. She was gesturing animatedly to a small crowd, probably talking about her husband's tech startup or their summer home in Napa. Near the photo booth I spotted Marcus Chen, who'd been captain of our debate team. He was now wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit and pointing at what appeared to be photos of his kids on his phone. Even from across the room I could see the gleam of success radiating from him like heat from asphalt in summer. I grabbed a beer from the bar and tried to blend in, making small talk with whoever approached me. Most conversations followed the same pattern. Initial recognition, forced smiles, the inevitable question about what I was doing now, followed by polite nods and quick escapes when I mentioned my current situation. Jake! Jake Morrison? I turned to see Tommy Rodriguez approaching with a wide grin. We'd been friends in high school, bonding over our shared love of vintage cars and dreams of making it big someday. Tommy looked good. Really good. His hair was styled with the kind of precision that spoke of expensive salons, and his watch caught the light in a way that suggested it cost more than most people's cars. Tommy, man, great to see you. I extended my hand, but he pulled me into a hug that felt genuine despite the obvious disparity in our circumstances. Look at you. Still the same old Jake. How've you been, brother? Can't complain, you know how it is. I gestured vaguely, hoping to keep things light. You look like life's been treating you well. Tommy's chest puffed out slightly. Yeah, actually, things have been incredible. We just closed our 3rd dealership last month. Rodriguez Auto Group. Maybe you've seen our commercials? We're all over the Bay Area now. That's amazing, man. Really happy for you. What about you? Still working on that? He paused, clearly trying to remember what I'd been passionate about in high school. That business thing you were always talking about? Before I could answer, a familiar laugh cut through the ambient noise like a knife through silk. My stomach dropped as I turned toward the sound, and there she was. Victoria Blackwood. Even after 7 years, she still had the power to stop my breath. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves over her shoulders, and she wore a red dress that probably cost more than my rent for 3 months. She was surrounded by a small group of admirers, holding court like she owned the room. Which, knowing Victoria, she might have. Tommy followed my gaze and let out a low whistle. Victoria Blackwood. Now there's a success story. Did you hear she started some kind of consulting firm? Made millions, apparently. Bought some huge houses in Pacific Heights. I felt my throat tighten. Yeah, heard something like that. Didn't you two date for a while after graduation? Something like that. The words came out smaller than I intended. Victoria's group erupted in laughter at something she'd said, and the sound hit me like a physical blow. I remembered that laugh, how it used to be my favorite sound in the world. Now it felt like mockery, even though she hadn't noticed me yet. Tommy was still talking, but his words faded into background noise as memories flooded back. Victoria and I had dated for 3 years after high school. She'd believed in my dreams back then, or at least she'd said she did. I was going to revolutionize e-commerce, create the next big platform that would change how people shopped online. She'd listened to my late-night rants about business models and user interfaces, nodding along with what seemed like genuine interest. But that was before everything fell apart. Before the failed startup, the mounting debt, the nights I'd come home to our shared apartment and find her staring at her laptop screen with increasing frustration. Before the fights about money, about my inability to provide the lifestyle she'd grown accustomed to, about how my dreams were just fantasies that would never pay the bills. The breakup had been brutal. Not screaming and throwing things brutal, but worse. The slow, methodical dismantling of everything we'd built together. She'd moved out piece by piece, taking not just her belongings but also the last remnants of my confidence. The final conversation still played in my head sometimes during dark moments. You're a dreamer, Jake, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But I need someone who can actually make those dreams happen. I can't keep waiting for someday. That was 7 years ago. 7 years of rebuilding, of working dead-end jobs while plotting my comeback, of living in studio apartments and driving a car that made concerning noises when I turned left. Jake, you okay, man? Tommy's voice snapped me back to the present. I realized I'd been staring at Victoria for longer than was socially acceptable. Yeah, just lost in thought for a second. You should go say hi. I'm sure she'd love to catch up. I was about to deflect when Victoria's eyes swept across the room and landed on mine. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. Her expression shifted from surprise to something I couldn't quite read, then settled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She excused herself from her group and walked toward us, her heels clicking against the marble floor with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted her place in the world. Jake Morrison, I can't believe you're here. Victoria, you look. I searched for words that wouldn't sound desperate or bitter. You look amazing. Thank you. You look. She paused, taking in my off-the-rack suit and worn shoes. You look exactly the same. Tommy, sensing the tension, mumbled something about getting another drink and disappeared into the crowd. Victoria and I stood there for a moment, two people who'd once shared everything, now separated by an ocean of unspoken history. So, she said, her voice taking on a tone I recognized from our final months together, polite but distant. What are you up to these days? Still working on the next big thing? The question hit like a slap. She knew exactly what she was doing, and we both knew it. I'm between projects right now, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Consulting mostly. You know how it is in tech. Her smile became sharper. Oh, I do know how it is in tech. That's actually how I built my company. Understanding what works and what doesn't, what's realistic and what's just wishful thinking. The words hung in the air between us like smoke. Around us, the party continued. Laughter, clinking glasses, the soft murmur of successful people discussing successful things. But in our little bubble, the temperature had dropped 20 degrees. Consulting, she repeated, as if tasting the word. That's interesting. What kind of clients? I felt heat rise in my cheeks. The truth was, I'd been doing freelance web design for small businesses, barely scraping together enough to cover rent and ramen noodles. Not exactly the empire I'd promised to build. Small businesses mostly, helping them optimize their digital presence. How? Quaint. She took a sip of her champagne, and I noticed the rock on her finger. Not a wedding ring, but a diamond so large it could probably be seen from space. You know, my firm specializes in digital transformation for Fortune 500 companies. We just finished a project with Google. Maybe I could throw some work your way, for old time's sake. The condescension in her voice was like acid. This was Victoria at her most dangerous, offering help while simultaneously making it clear that you needed it desperately. That's generous, but I'm actually pretty booked up at the moment. Of course you are. Her laugh was light, musical, and completely without humor. "You always were optimistic about your prospects." More people had started to notice our conversation. I could see heads turning, whispers being exchanged. Everyone remembered that Jake and Victoria had been a thing. Everyone also remembered how spectacularly I'd flamed out after graduation while she'd soared. Victoria! A tall man in an expensive suit appeared at her side, sliding his arm around her waist with the easy confidence of someone who'd never been told, "No, sorry I'm late." The helicopter pad at the office was busier than expected. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. She turned to him with a smile that actually reached her eyes this time. "Jake, this is David Sterling. He runs Sterling Capital Management. David, this is Jake Morrison. We went to high school together." David extended a hand with the grip of someone who'd grown up shaking hands with senators and CEOs. "Nice to meet you, Jake. What line of work are you in?" "He's a consultant," Victoria answered before I could speak, and somehow she made it sound like I cleaned sewers for a living. "Consulting, EH? What's your specialty?" I felt like a deer caught in headlights, with Victoria watching my every move like a predator waiting for the kill. The ballroom felt smaller suddenly, the walls closing in as more faces turned our way. "Digital marketing," I managed. "Small business optimization." Ah, David's interest visibly waned. "Well, that's nice. Very important work, I'm sure." The dismissal was so casual, so effortless, that it almost hurt worse than Victoria's calculated cruelty. To David, I simply didn't exist in any meaningful way. I was background noise, a minor character in the story of important people doing important things. "You know," Victoria said, swirling her champagne, "Jake used to have such big dreams in high school. He was going to be the next Steve Jobs, weren't you, Jake? Always talking about how he was going to change the world with some revolutionary idea." The small crowd that had gathered around us tittered politely. I felt my face burn with embarrassment and rage, but I kept my expression neutral. This was Victoria's show now, and everyone knew it. "Dreams are important," I said quietly. "Even when they take longer to achieve than expected." "Oh, absolutely," she agreed with mock sincerity. "It's so admirable how you've, what's the word? Persevere? Even when it became clear that maybe the dreams were a little too big for the dreamer." The words hit their target perfectly. Around us, people tried to hide their smirks behind champagne glasses and appetizer plates. I was the entertainment now, the cautionary tale that made everyone else feel better about their own safe, successful choices. "I mean," Victoria continued, warming to her theme, "it takes real character to keep believing in yourself, even when everyone around you can see that it's just not going to happen. Some people might call it delusional, but I think it's actually quite sweet." David chuckled and pulled her closer. "Victoria's always been good at seeing potential in people, even when that potential is, let's say, modest." The laughter that followed felt like knives. I stood there, surrounded by my former classmates, being systematically destroyed by the woman I'd once loved, and there was nothing I could do about it. Fighting back would only make it worse, make me look desperate and bitter. Walking away would confirm everything she was saying about me, so I stood there and took it, like I'd been taking everything for the past 7 years. The failed business ventures, the rejection letters, the nights lying awake wondering if everyone was right and I really was just a dreamer who'd never learned to live in the real world. "Well," Victoria said finally, "it's been lovely catching up, Jake. Really, I hope things work out for you. I really do." The sympathy in her voice was the final blow. Not anger, not hatred. Pity. She pitied me, and she was making sure everyone else in the room knew they should too. As she turned to leave with David, I heard her voice carry just far enough for me to catch her words. "Some people never learn when to give up on a fantasy and get a real job." The group dispersed, moving on to more interesting conversations with more successful people. I stood alone near the bar, holding my now warm beer, feeling like the biggest failure in a room full of winners. That's when I saw him approaching from across the room, a young man in an impeccably tailored black suit, moving with purpose through the crowd. He looked out of place in a different way than I did, Where I looked like I couldn't afford to be there, he looked like he was too important to be there. He walked straight toward me, his eyes never leaving mine, and something in his expression made my heart start racing in a way that had nothing to do with humiliation and everything to do with anticipation. "Mr. Morrison?" he said when he reached me, his voice low and professional. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something that caught the light, something silver and unmistakably expensive. "Your yacht is ready, sir. Shall I have the car brought around?" The young man standing before me couldn't have been more than 25, but he carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world. His black suit was cut with surgical precision, and when he moved, there wasn't a wrinkle to be found. Everything about him screamed expensive, from his perfectly styled dark hair to the Italian leather of his shoes that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" I managed, certain I'd misheard him over the noise of the reunion. "Your yacht, sir. The Meridian. Captain Richards called to confirm she's fueled and ready for departure. The evening crew has already prepared the deck for your guests." His voice was calm, professional, with just a hint of a Boston accent that suggested private schools and old money connections. I stared at him, my brain struggling to process what was happening. Around us, the conversations had started to slow. People were turning, their attention drawn by this impeccably dressed stranger, who'd appeared like something out of a different world entirely. "I think you have the wrong person," I said quietly, hoping to end this confusion before it became even more embarrassing than my encounter with Victoria. The young man, my supposed assistant, reached into his breast pocket and withdrew a sleek tablet. With practiced efficiency, he swiped across the screen and turned it toward me. On the display was a photo of a magnificent yacht, easily 120 feet long, gleaming white against azure waters. Below the image, in crisp digital text, read, "M.Y. Meridian, registered owner, Morrison Maritime Holdings LLC. There's no mistake, Mr. Morrison. I'm Marcus Chen, your executive assistant. I apologize for the interruption, but there are several urgent matters that require your immediate attention." Marcus Chen. The name hit me like a lightning bolt, but this wasn't Marcus Chen from my high school debate team who I'd spotted earlier. This Marcus was younger, sharper, and spoke with the kind of confidence that came from managing the affairs of someone very important. The tablet screen shifted to what appeared to be a calendar filled with appointments. I caught glimpses of entries that made no sense. Conference call with Singapore partners, review quarterly reports from European division, approve final designs for Miami development project. "Sir?" Marcus waited patiently while I stared at the screen, my mind reeling. From somewhere behind me, I heard Victoria's voice, sharp with surprise. "Jake, what's going on?" I turned to see that our entire corner of the ballroom had gone silent. Victoria stood frozen, champagne glass halfway to her lips, her perfectly composed expression cracking for the first time all evening. David Sterling was staring at Marcus with the kind of recognition that wealthy people reserved for others in their exclusive circle. Tommy Rodriguez had materialized beside them, his mouth slightly open as he took in Marcus's obvious importance. Even Jennifer Hayes Morrison had stopped mid-conversation with her group to stare. "Is there a problem, Mr. Morrison?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying just far enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Should I reschedule the conference call with the Tokyo office? I know they were hoping to finalize the acquisition details tonight. Acquisition details. Tokyo office." The words floated through the air like expensive perfume, impossible to ignore. Victoria stepped closer, her eyes narrowing as she studied Marcus with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle. "I'm sorry, but who exactly are you?" Marcus turned to her with the polite smile of someone accustomed to dealing with interruptions from people who weren't on his boss's level. "Marcus Chen, executive assistant to Mr. Morrison. And you are?" "Victoria Blackwood." She said her name like it should mean something to him. "I'm an old friend of Jake's." "Ah," Marcus made a note on his tablet. "Should I add Ms. Blackwood to the guest list for this evening's gathering on the yacht? We're expecting the mayor and several city council members, along with the Henderson family from Henderson Industries." The Henderson family. Even I knew that name. They owned half the real estate in Northern California and had their fingers in everything from tech ventures to wine country developments. Victoria's champagne glass trembled slightly in her hand. "I'm sorry, did you say yacht?" "The Meridian, yes. She's anchored at Pier 39. Mr. Morrison prefers to entertain clients there rather than at the Nob Hill residence. More privacy for sensitive business discussions. Nob Hill residence." I felt like I was trapped in someone else's dream, watching this unfold from outside my own body. David Sterling moved closer, his earlier dismissive attitude replaced by sharp interest. "Sterling Capital Management," he said, extending his hand to Marcus. "We handle investment portfolios for several high-net-worth individuals in the Bay Area." Marcus accepted the handshake with professional courtesy but didn't seem particularly impressed. "I'll make sure Mr. Morrison receives your card. Though I should mention his portfolio is currently managed by Goldman Sachs and Blackstone. They handle most of the Morrison Group's investment strategies. The Morrison Group, Goldman Sachs, Blackstone." Each name dropped like a stone into still water, creating ripples of recognition and amazement through the growing crowd of onlookers. "The Morrison Group?" Tommy's voice cracked slightly. "Like the Morrison Group that just bought that entire block downtown? The one building the new mixed-use development?" Marcus nodded as if this was common knowledge. "Among other projects. Mr. Morrison prefers to keep a diverse portfolio. Real estate, technology ventures, maritime investments." He glanced at his tablet again. "Speaking of which, sir, the legal team needs your signature on the contracts for the Portland acquisition. They're standing by." Portland acquisition. I could see people around us pulling out their phones, probably Googling furiously to figure out what massive deal was apparently happening in Portland. Victoria had gone very still, her earlier confidence evaporating like morning fog. "Jake, I don't understand. What's going on here?" Marcus looked at me expectantly, and I realized that everyone was waiting for me to say something. The problem was, I had absolutely no idea what was happening. This had to be some kind of mistake, some cosmic mix-up that would be revealed any moment now. But as I looked around at the faces staring at me, Victoria's shock, David's sudden respect, Tommy's awe, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time in 7 years, I wasn't the failure in the room. I wasn't the cautionary tale or the object of pity. Whatever this was, whoever Marcus really was, I decided to play along. "Victoria," I said quietly, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. About a lot of things." She blinked rapidly as if trying to clear her vision. "But you said you were consulting, small businesses." "I said I was between projects. I didn't say what kind of projects." Marcus stepped smoothly into the conversation. "Mr. Morrison prefers to keep a low profile about his business ventures. Privacy is essential when you're negotiating deals at this level." "But," Victoria's voice was smaller now, uncertain, "you live in that studio apartment on Mission Street." "One of several properties," Marcus replied before I could speak. "Mr. Morrison maintains residences in multiple cities for business purposes. The San Francisco location is primarily used when he's overseeing the West Coast operations. I was starting to believe this fantasy. David Sterling was studying me with new eyes, clearly recalculating everything he thought he knew. "Morrison Group. You're J.M. Morrison?" Marcus smiled slightly. "Mr. Morrison values his privacy, as I mentioned. He prefers to conduct business without the publicity that often comes with high-profile acquisitions." "Jesus Christ," David breathed. "I read about the Portland deal in the Wall Street Journal. Estimated value was what? 800 million? The exact figures are confidential," Marcus said smoothly, "but that's not entirely inaccurate." 800 million? The number hung in the air like a neon sign. I could see people around us doing mental calculations, trying to reconcile the man they thought they knew with this new reality. Victoria looked like she might faint. The color had drained from her face, and she was gripping her champagne glass so tightly I was worried it might shatter. "There must be some mistake," she said weakly. "Jake, tell them there's been a mistake." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something I'd never seen before. Fear. Not just surprise or confusion, but genuine fear. The same fear I'd lived with for years. The terror of being exposed as inadequate, of having your carefully constructed facade torn away in front of everyone who mattered. "The only mistake," I said quietly, "was thinking you knew who I really was." Marcus checked his tablet again. "Sir, I hate to interrupt, but we really should get moving. The helicopter is waiting on the roof of the Fairmont, and Captain Richards wants to discuss the route to Catalina Island for tomorrow's client meeting." Helicopter. Catalina Island. Client meeting. Each detail was another nail in the coffin of Victoria's assumptions about my life. "Of course," I said, surprised by how natural it felt to play this role. "We shouldn't keep the captain waiting." As I moved to leave, Victoria grabbed my arm. Her touch was desperate, nothing like the confident woman who'd been destroying me just minutes earlier. "Jake, wait. I think we should talk. Privately." I looked down at her hand on my sleeve, then up into her eyes. For a moment, I saw a flash of the woman I'd once loved, vulnerable and uncertain. But then I remembered her words from just minutes ago. Some people never learn when to give up on a fantasy and get a real job. "I'm sorry, Victoria, but as you can see, I'm quite busy these days. Perhaps your assistant can contact Marcus to schedule something. Though I should warn you, my calendar is pretty booked for the next few months." Her hand fell away from my arm as if I'd burned her. Marcus was already moving toward the ballroom exit, and I followed, feeling the weight of dozens of stares on my back. As we walked, I could hear the explosion of whispered conversations behind us. "Did you know? J.M. Morrison, that's huge. $800 million. And Victoria thought he was broke." We reached the elevator bank, and Marcus pressed the button for the roof. As we waited, he turned to me with a slight smile. "Nicely played, sir." "I have absolutely no idea what's happening," I admitted. "I know," he said, "but you played it perfectly anyway." The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and as we stepped inside, I caught one last glimpse of the ballroom. Victoria was standing exactly where I'd left her, surrounded by people who were undoubtedly asking her dozens of questions she couldn't answer. For the first time in 7 years, she was the one who didn't know what to say. The elevator doors closed, and Marcus pressed the button for the roof. As we rose above the party, above the whispers and the shock and Victoria's shattered assumptions, I felt something I hadn't experienced in longer than I could remember. Power. "So," I said as the floor numbers climbed, "are you going to tell me what's really going on?" Marcus smiled and adjusted his perfectly knotted tie. "All in due time, Mr. Morrison. All in due time." The elevator reached the roof with a gentle bump, and through the doors I could hear the distinctive whop-whop-whop of helicopter rotors spinning in the night air. The helicopter ride over San Francisco Bay should have been terrifying for someone who'd never been in anything more luxurious than a commercial airliner. Instead, as I watched the city lights blur beneath us through the aircraft's pristine windows, I felt strangely calm. Maybe it was a shock. Maybe it was the surreal nature of everything that had happened in the past hour. Or maybe, for the first time in years, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Marcus sat across from me, speaking quietly into a headset with someone about maritime regulations and dock permissions. The pilot, a woman in her 50s with graying hair and the confident demeanor of someone who'd flown much more important people than me, navigated through the night sky with practiced ease. As we approached Pier 39, I could see the marina spread out below us like a constellation of white boats bobbing in dark water. But even from this height, one vessel stood out from the rest. The Meridian was magnificent, sleek lines of white and chrome stretching what had to be well over 100 feet, with multiple decks that gleamed under strategically placed lighting. "Beautiful, isn't she?" Marcus said, following my gaze. "She's incredible." And she was. Even in my wildest fantasies about success, I'd never imagined owning something so spectacular. The helicopter touched down on a private helipad near the marina, and within minutes we were walking down a pristine dock toward the yacht. Other boats bobbed nearby, impressive vessels in their own right, but they looked like dinghies compared to the Meridian. As we approached, crew members in crisp white uniforms emerged to greet us. A distinguished man with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command stepped forward. "Good evening, Mr. Morrison. Welcome aboard. I'm Captain Richards." I shook his hand, still feeling like I was acting in a play where I hadn't been given the script. "Captain, thank you for having everything ready." "Of course, sir. The galley has prepared your usual selection of appetizers, and the wine cellar is fully stocked. Will you be entertaining guests this evening?" Marcus consulted his tablet. "Not tonight, Captain. Mr. Morrison has had a long day. Perhaps just a quiet dinner on the main deck?" "Certainly. I'll have Chef Martinez prepare something special." As Captain Richards departed, Marcus gestured toward a seating area on the yacht's main deck. Plush white furniture was arranged around a glass table, with soft lighting creating an atmosphere of understated luxury. The view of the San Francisco skyline was breathtaking, the city lights reflecting off the water like scattered diamonds. "All right," I said, settling into one of the incredibly comfortable chairs. "I think it's time you told me what's really going on here." Marcus poured 2 glasses of wine from a bottle that had been waiting for us. Something French with a label I didn't recognize, but suspected cost more than my monthly rent. He handed me a glass and settled into the chair across from me. "Do you remember Innovate Solutions?" he asked. The name hit me like a physical blow. Innovate Solutions has been my baby, my dream, my everything. It was the e-commerce platform I'd spent 3 years building from the ground up after graduating from Berkeley with a computer science degree and more ambition than sense. "Of course I remember," I said quietly. "It was my company, before everything fell apart." "Tell me about those days. What was Innovate Solutions supposed to do?" I took a sip of wine, letting the memory wash over me. It was going to revolutionize online retail. Instead of just having a website where you browsed products, Innovate Solutions would create personalized shopping experiences. Artificial intelligence that learns your preferences, your style, your budget, and curated selections just for you. It would integrate with social media, learn from your friends' purchases, predict what you'd want before you even knew you wanted it. And what happened? The familiar pain settled in my chest. I was ahead of my time. The technology existed, but barely. The computing power required was enormous, and cloud services were expensive and unreliable. Investors thought it sounded like science fiction. I burned through my savings, then Victoria's savings, then every credit card I could get approved for. Marcus nodded, encouraging me to continue. The final presentation was supposed to be with Meridian Ventures. They were one of the biggest early-stage investment firms on the West Coast. I'd been working toward that meeting for months. It was going to be my last shot at securing real funding. I could still remember that day with perfect clarity. March 15th, 2017. I'd worn my best suit, the same one I'd worn to the reunion tonight, actually, and carried a briefcase filled with prototypes, business plans, and dreams. The meeting was at their offices in downtown San Francisco, 42nd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay. I was supposed to present to their senior partners, 5 people who could make or break my future with a single decision. What went wrong? Everything. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. The demo crashed during the first 5 minutes. The artificial intelligence that was supposed to showcase personalized recommendations kept suggesting children's toys to a 60-year-old venture capitalist. The social media integration pulled up inappropriate photos from someone's college spring break. It was a disaster. Marcus leaned forward slightly. "But that wasn't the worst part, was it?" "No." The words came out barely above a whisper. "The worst part was when Sarah Blackwood asked about our user acquisition strategy." "Sarah Blackwood," Marcus repeated. "Victoria's mother. Victoria's mother, who I didn't know was Victoria's mother until that moment." Victoria had never mentioned that her family was connected to venture capital, that her mother was one of the most powerful investors in Silicon Valley. When Sarah introduced herself, I saw Victoria's face go white. The memory was still vivid. The conference room had felt like it was shrinking as the realization dawned on me. Victoria hadn't told her mother about our relationship, about my company, about anything. I was just another hopeful entrepreneur pitching to her mother's firm, not someone she was living with and supposedly supporting. Sarah looked at the failed demo, looked at me, and then looked at Victoria. "Miss Blackwood," she said, "I believe you're familiar with this entrepreneur's work." Victoria just sat there, frozen. She could have said something, could have vouched for me, could have explained that this was just a bad day and that Innovate Solutions was actually revolutionary. But she didn't. She didn't say a word. Just sat there while her mother methodically dismantled everything I'd worked for. Sarah called the concept technologically unfeasible, said the business model was fundamentally flawed, and suggested I might want to consider more realistic career options. I took another sip of wine, surprised by how much it helped dull the edge of the memory. The meeting lasted exactly 17 minutes. 17 minutes to destroy 3 years of work. As we left the building, Victoria finally spoke. She said, "Why didn't you tell me you were presenting to my mother's firm?" I told her I didn't know she was her mother. Victoria said, "I didn't tell you because I knew this would happen." She knew you'd fail. She knew her mother would reject the idea, and she was embarrassed to be associated with what she saw as inevitable failure. That's when I realized that Victoria had never really believed in Innovate Solutions. She'd been going through the motions, waiting for me to come to my senses and get a real job. Marcus was quiet for a moment, letting the weight of the story settle between us. "The business died that day," I continued. "Not just because of the funding rejection, but because I realized that even the person closest to me thought I was delusional." Victoria moved out 2 weeks later. Said she couldn't watch me, quote, "destroy myself chasing impossible dreams anymore." And after that, I gave up. Sold everything I had to pay off the debts, took a job doing basic web design for a small agency, and tried to convince myself that Victoria and her mother were right, that I'd been naive to think I could change the world. The San Francisco skyline glittered before us, beautiful and indifferent to the pain of one failed entrepreneur's story. I spent the next 7 years in a kind of professional purgatory, I continued. Taking freelance projects, building simple websites for local restaurants and small retail stores. Nothing innovative, nothing revolutionary, just safe, predictable work that paid the bills and wouldn't embarrass anyone. But you never stopped thinking about Innovate Solutions, did you? How could I? Every time I used Amazon's recommendation engine, or saw how Netflix suggested movies, or watched social media platforms track user behavior to sell targeted advertising, I saw pieces of what I'd been trying to build. The technology caught up. Cloud computing became cheaper and more reliable. Machine learning algorithms became more sophisticated. Everything I'd envisioned became not just possible, but inevitable. Marcus smiled slightly. "And what did you do with that knowledge?" "Nothing. Absolutely nothing. I watched other companies build versions of my ideas and become worth billions, while I designed websites for pizza shops and hair salons. I told myself I'd had my chance and blown it, that I should be grateful for the steady income and stop dreaming about what might have been. Until 18 months ago. I looked at him sharply. "What do you know about 18 months ago?" "That's when you started working nights again. Building something new. Something you kept secret from everyone, including the few friends you had left." He was right. 18 months ago, something had snapped inside me. Maybe it was reading about another AI-powered retail startup getting a $100 million valuation. Maybe it was seeing Victoria's success splashed across business magazines. Or maybe I'd just reached the point where the regret was more painful than the risk of failing again. I started small, I admitted. Really small. Instead of trying to build the entire platform at once, I focused on just one piece: predictive inventory management for small retailers. Something that would help them stock the right products at the right time based on customer behavior patterns. And you tested it where? With my existing clients. The pizza shop, the hair salon, a small boutique in the Mission District. I offered to implement the system for free in exchange for feedback and performance data. Marcus pulled out his tablet and showed me a screen filled with numbers and charts. Santino's Pizza saw a 23% reduction in food waste and a 31% increase in customer satisfaction within 6 months. Bella's Hair Studio reduced product overstocking by 40%, while increasing retail sales by 28%. The Mission Boutique improved their seasonal buying accuracy by 67%. I stared at the data, recognizing the numbers but amazed to see them compiled so professionally. How do you have all this? Because 18 months ago, you weren't just building a better inventory system. You were building the foundation for something much bigger. Something that would make Innovate Solutions look like a prototype. He swiped to another screen, showing what appeared to be a complex organizational chart. Morrison Analytics, Morrison Maritime Holdings, Morrison Group Real Estate, Morrison Technology Ventures. You've been busy, Mr. Morrison. I don't understand. I never created any of those companies. Marcus's smile widened. No, you didn't. But someone who believes in your vision did. Someone who's been watching your work, tracking your results, and waiting for the right moment to make you an offer you couldn't refuse. Who? The same person who's been funding your operations for the past year without you knowing it. The same person who ensured that your small-scale tests had the resources they needed to succeed. The same person who set up tonight's little performance to give you a taste of what your life could look like. I felt the world shift around me again. Someone's been funding me, but I've been paying for everything myself. Have you? Really? Marcus consulted his tablet again. When the cloud hosting costs for your algorithms started getting expensive, didn't you receive an unexpected rebate from your service provider? When you needed better development hardware, didn't you win a surprisingly generous equipment upgrade from that software contest you barely remembered entering? When your apartment building was sold and you thought you'd have to move, didn't the new owners offer you a surprisingly affordable long-term lease? Each example hit me like a revelation. All of those things had happened, and I'd been grateful for what I'd assumed was just unusually good luck. Someone's been managing your life from behind the scenes, Marcus continued, making sure you had everything you needed to focus on your work without worrying about rent or equipment costs or the 100 other small financial stresses that kill innovation. But why? Because 7 years ago, you pitched an idea that was absolutely brilliant. You were just presenting it to the wrong people at the wrong time. But there was someone else in that room that day, someone who understood exactly what you were trying to build and why it would change everything. Marcus turned his tablet toward me, showing a professional headshot of a woman I didn't recognize. She appeared to be in her 60s, with silver hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to look right through the camera. Meet Elena Vasquez, founding partner of Meridian Ventures and one of the most successful technology investors in Silicon Valley. She's funded 17 companies that became worth over $1 billion, including 3 that revolutionized e-commerce. I don't remember meeting anyone named Elena Vasquez. She was the quiet woman sitting in the corner during your presentation, the one who didn't ask any questions or make any comments. While Sarah Blackwood was destroying your confidence, Elena was studying your algorithms and understanding their true potential. I tried to remember that disastrous day, but most of my memories were focused on the humiliation and Victoria's betrayal. There might have been someone else in the room, but I'd been too focused on the failure to notice. Elena has been following your career ever since. When you disappeared into freelance web design, she was disappointed but not surprised. When you started building something new 18 months ago, she was ready to help. And tonight? Tonight was your final exam. Elena wanted to see how you'd handle success before she offered it to you permanently. She wanted to know if you'd use power responsibly, or if you'd become vindictive and cruel. I thought about the moment when Victoria had grabbed my arm, desperate and afraid. I could have destroyed her the way she'd destroyed me. I could have made her beg, made her suffer, made her feel as small as she'd made me feel. Did I pass? Marcus's smile was genuinely warm. With flying colors, you had the chance to humiliate Victoria in front of everyone who mattered to her. And instead, you chose dignity. You played the role of a successful man without losing the qualities that made you worth believing in the first place. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Congratulations, Jake, we should talk. Evie. I looked up at Marcus, then at the yacht surrounding us, then at the city sparkling across the water. 7 years of failure, of self-doubt, of watching other people live the life I dreamed of building. So what happens now? Marcus stood and walked to the railing, gazing out at the bay. Now you decide. Elena is offering you everything you see here. The yacht, the companies, the resources to build whatever you can imagine. But it comes with a price. What kind of price? You have to choose. You can accept this life, take control of these companies, and build the empire you always dreamed of. But if you do, there's no going back to being safe. No more hiding behind small projects and careful dreams. You'll be taking on the same people who destroyed you 7 years ago, and this time the stakes will be much higher. I looked down at my hands, still holding the glass of wine that probably cost more than I used to make in a week. Everything I'd ever wanted was being offered to me, but the boy who'd failed so spectacularly in that conference room was still somewhere inside me, whispering warnings about getting too close to the sun. What if I fail again? Marcus turned back to me with an expression that was both kind and fierce. Then you'll fail as the man you really are, not as the small version of yourself you've been hiding behind. The choice stretched out before me like the dark water of the bay. Vast, uncertain, and full of possibilities I couldn't even begin to imagine. For the first time in 7 years, I was truly terrified. And for the first time in 7 years, I was truly alive. 3 days after that life-changing conversation on the yacht, I found myself sitting in a glass conference room on the 38th floor of the Meridian Ventures building, staring at Elena Vasquez across a mahogany table that probably cost more than my car. The irony wasn't lost on me. 7 years ago, I'd been humiliated in this same building, and now I was back as an invited guest. Elena was smaller than I'd expected, maybe 5'4", with silver hair pulled back in a simple bun and intelligent brown eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of my appearance and demeanor. She wore a navy blazer over a white blouse, minimal jewelry, and an expression of calm authority that came from decades of making decisions that created or destroyed fortunes. "Jake," she said, her voice carrying just a hint of a Spanish accent. "I've been looking forward to this conversation for a very long time. Ms. Vasquez, I have to ask, why me? Why now?" She smiled, reaching for a thick folder that had been waiting on the table. "Do you know what I see when I look at failed entrepreneurs?" I shook my head. Most people see weakness, poor judgment, someone who couldn't execute their vision. But I see something different. I see someone who was brave enough to try, smart enough to learn from failure, and humble enough to rebuild from the ground up. She opened the folder and slid a document across the table. "This is your real story, Jake, not the version Victoria tells at cocktail parties." The document was a detailed analysis of my work over the past 18 months, but it was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Charts showed user engagement metrics, revenue projections, and growth patterns for the small businesses I'd been helping. But more than that, it showed connections I hadn't even realized existed. "Santino's Pizza wasn't just using your inventory system," Elena explained. "The predictive algorithms you built identified micro-trends in food preferences that helped him expand his menu strategically. Revenue increased 47% in 6 months. I thought that was just because of better ingredient ordering. The Mission Boutique case study is even more impressive. Your system didn't just reduce overstocking. It identified emerging fashion trends weeks before her competitors noticed them. She became the first shop in the neighborhood to carry styles that later became viral on social media. I studied the numbers, amazed by patterns I hadn't seen while living through them day by day. But these were just small experiments. Local businesses." Elena leaned forward, her eyes brightening. "That's exactly what made them brilliant. Instead of trying to build a massive platform and hoping it would work, you tested your concepts in controlled environments where you could measure real results. You proved your theories work before scaling them." She flipped to another section of the report. "But the real breakthrough came 8 months ago, didn't it? When you connect the data streams." I felt my pulse quicken. She was referring to something I'd barely admitted to myself. The moment when I'd realized that the individual systems I was building could communicate with each other, creating a network effect that multiplied their effectiveness. Tell me about the night you made that connection. The memory was vivid. I'd been working late in my studio apartment, surrounded by 3 monitors displaying data from different client implementations. Santino's was running low on pepperoni based on weekend projection models. The Mission Boutique was overstocked on summer dresses as fall approaches. Bella's hair studio had excess inventory of a particular shampoo brand that wasn't moving. I was looking at surplus inventory reports, I said slowly, and I realized that Bella's customers might be exactly the demographic who would shop at the Mission Boutique. And the boutique's customers were probably the same people ordering from Santino's on Friday nights. So you built a bridge. I created an algorithm that could identify customer overlap between different businesses and suggest cross-promotional opportunities. Bella started offering Mission Boutique discount codes to customers who bought certain products. The boutique began recommending Santino's for their customer appreciation events. Santino's started promoting Bella's services for date night specials. Elena's smile was proud, almost maternal. And the results? All 3 businesses saw revenue increases between 23% and 31% within 2 months. But more importantly, customer satisfaction scores went up across the board. People felt like these businesses really understood their preferences and lifestyle. Because you'd created a localized ecosystem where artificial intelligence could learn from customer behavior across multiple touchpoints, Elena said. You'd built exactly what you proposed 7 years ago, just at a smaller scale. I stared at the data, seeing my work through her eyes for the first time, but it was still just 3 businesses in one neighborhood. No, Jake. It was a proof of concept that could revolutionize retail commerce globally. She pulled out another document, this one showing a map of San Francisco with dozens of red dots scattered across different neighborhoods. Because you didn't stop at 3 businesses, did you? She was right. Word had spread quietly through the small business community. A restaurant owner would mention improved sales to a friend who ran a bookstore. A salon owner would recommend my services to her neighbor who owned a fitness studio. I'd been careful to take on only clients I could handle personally, but the network had grown organically. 47 businesses across 6 neighborhoods, Elena continued. Each one connected to your central analytics platform. Each one benefiting from insights generated by the collective data of the others. You created a functioning prototype of the most sophisticated retail intelligence network anyone has ever built. But no one knew. I kept everything confidential, separate. Each client thought they were just getting basic inventory management, which was a brilliant strategy. You avoided the regulatory complications of data sharing while proving that your concept could scale. You demonstrated that artificial intelligence could create value for small businesses without requiring massive infrastructure investments. Elena stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking San Francisco Bay. But the real genius was what happened 6 months ago, the expansion experiment. My stomach tightened. She knew about Portland. You convinced a client to let you test your system in their second location, she continued, without turning around. Bella's cousin Maria was opening a similar salon in Portland, and you offered to implement your platform there as well. Maria's salon had been struggling in its first months of operation. Portland was a different market with different customer preferences, and she was hemorrhaging money trying to figure out what products and services would work. I'd offered to help for free, partly out of loyalty to Bella and partly because I was curious whether my algorithms could adapt to a completely different geographic market. Within 3 months, Maria's salon was profitable, Elena said. Not just stable, profitable. Your system had identified Portland-specific trends and preferences that even local competitors hadn't recognized. It was one salon. It was validation that your technology could work in any market, with any customer base given sufficient data. Elena returned to her seat and fixed me with an intense stare. That's when I knew it was time to intervene. Intervene how? Do you remember the equipment upgrade you received 4 months ago? The new servers that allowed you to process data from all 47 businesses simultaneously? I'd won those servers in what I'd thought was a random contest from a tech hardware company. That was you? My team created the contest specifically for you. We needed you to have infrastructure capable of handling the data load for what came next. Which was? Elena's smile turned predatory. The stress test. We began feeding your system additional data streams, anonymous purchasing patterns from major retailers, demographic information from census databases, social media trend analysis from marketing firms. All of it carefully filtered and anonymized, but comprehensive enough to test whether your algorithms could scale to national-level commerce. I felt like I was learning about my own life from a stranger. How could you access all that data legally? Morrison Analytics, she said simply. The data consulting firm we established in your name 6 months ago. It has contracts with dozens of major corporations to provide market analysis and consumer behavior insights. You've been generating those insights using your algorithms, and we've been selling them to Fortune 500 companies. My head was spinning. I never signed anything to create Morrison Analytics. You didn't need to. The intellectual property rights to your algorithms were established through the patent applications we filed on your behalf. Since you were working under our research grant program, the legal framework was already in place. Research grant program? Elena pulled out yet another document, a contract with my signature on it dated 8 months earlier. The freelance consulting agreement you signed with Meridian Data Solutions. You probably thought it was just another client contract. But buried in the terms and conditions was authorization for us to patent and commercialize any innovative processes you developed during the engagement. I stared at my own signature, remembering the day I'd signed that contract. It had seemed like any other freelance agreement. Help a consulting firm with some data analysis projects, decent hourly rate, flexible schedule. I'd been focused on the immediate income and hadn't paid much attention to the fine print. That's not legal, I said weakly. It's completely legal. But more importantly, it's completely fair. You own 49% of Morrison Analytics and all related companies. The patents are filed jointly in both our names. You've been earning royalties on every report we've sold for the past 4 months. She slid another document across the table, a bank statement for an account I'd never seen before. The balance made my vision blur. $2.7 million, Elena said calmly. Your share of Morrison Analytics revenues through last month. The account was established with your social security number and driver's license information. You can access it anytime you want. I couldn't speak. The number was impossible. Incomprehensible. But that's just the beginning, Elena continued. Morrison Analytics was phase 1, proving your technology could generate value at enterprise scale. Morrison Maritime Holdings was phase 2. The Yacht? The Yacht, yes, but also a network of data collection vessels positioned throughout major shipping corridors. Maritime commerce generates massive amounts of logistics data, shipping schedules, cargo manifests, port capacity reports. We've been using your algorithms to identify inefficiencies in global supply chains. She showed me satellite images of container ships and port facilities, with overlay graphics showing optimal routing patterns and capacity utilization charts. Your systems have helped reduce shipping delays by an average of 12% across 17 major ports. The annual savings to global commerce exceed $400 million. I don't understand how my local business algorithms could apply to international shipping. Because the fundamental challenges are the same. Predicting demand, optimizing inventory, matching supply with consumer behavior. The scale is different, but the mathematical principles are identical. Elena's voice grew more excited as she continued. Morrison Group Real Estate was phase 3. We applied your consumer behavior analysis to property development and urban planning. Instead of building retail spaces and hoping businesses would succeed, we could predict which combinations of stores and services would thrive in specific locations. The Portland acquisition David Sterling mentioned at the reunion? A mixed-use development project where every retail space was pre-leased to businesses selected by your algorithms. The tenants were chosen based on complementary customer demographics and cross-promotional opportunities. It's the first shopping complex in history, with a 100% occupancy rate and 0 business failures in its first year. I was beginning to understand the scope of what had been built around my work. And Morrison Technology Ventures? That's phase 4, which we're launching next week. A venture capital fund that uses your algorithms to identify startup companies with the highest probability of success. Instead of relying on intuition and connections, we can analyze market trends, consumer behavior patterns, and competitive landscapes to predict which new businesses will thrive. Elena leaned back in her chair, watching my reaction carefully. In 18 months, your work has generated over $50 million in value across 4 different industries. You've created jobs for hundreds of people, improved efficiency for thousands of businesses, and solved problems that entire teams of consultants couldn't crack. And I never knew any of this was happening, because you were focused on the work itself, not the business implications. That's what made you the perfect partner. You weren't distracted by ego or profit. You were genuinely trying to solve problems and help people. I looked out the window at the San Francisco skyline, trying to process everything she'd told me. Why reveal all this now? Why not just keep me working in the background? Elena's expression grew serious. Because Phase 5 requires your active participation. We're ready to launch the complete platform, an integrated artificial intelligence system that can revolutionize retail commerce globally. But for that to work, we need you to step out of the shadows and become the public face of the technology. The public face? CEO of Morrison Enterprises, the parent company that will oversee all operations. Your algorithms, your vision, your leadership. We're talking about a potential market valuation of $20 billion within 5 years. $20 billion. The number was so large it didn't seem real. But there's a catch, Elena continued. Once we go public with this technology, every major corporation in the world will want to either partner with us or destroy us. Amazon, Google, Apple, Walmart. They'll all see Morrison Enterprises as either an opportunity or a threat. The competition will be brutal, and the stakes will be higher than anything you've ever imagined. I thought about my studio apartment, my freelance web design projects, my simple life of anonymity and safety. What if I say no? What if I want to go back to the way things were? Elena smiled sadly. You can't, Jake. The technology exists now, and it's too valuable to ignore. If you don't lead Morrison Enterprises, someone else will try to replicate your work. The difference is that they'll probably fail, wasting billions of dollars and years of research. Or worse, they'll succeed and use the technology in ways you never intended. What do you mean? Your algorithms could be used to manipulate consumer behavior, create artificial scarcity, or give unfair advantages to large corporations over small businesses. In the wrong hands, the same technology that helps Bella and Santino could be used to put them out of business. I understood. The choice wasn't really between success and failure anymore. It was between controlling my creation and watching someone else control it. If I agree to this, I said slowly, what happens to Victoria? To Sarah Blackwood? To everyone who said I was a failure? Elena's smile turned enigmatic. That depends entirely on how you choose to use your newfound position. Power is a tool, Jake. Like any tool, it can be used to build or to destroy. The question is, what kind of man do you want to be? I looked down at the bank statement again, at the impossible number that represented 18 months of work I'd thought was insignificant. Then I looked out at the city where Victoria was probably sitting in her office, managing her consulting firm, completely unaware that her broke loser ex-boyfriend had just discovered he was worth more money than she'd ever seen in her lifetime. For the first time since that disastrous presentation 7 years ago, I felt the familiar stirring of ambition in my chest. Not just the desire for revenge, but something bigger. The possibility of proving that the dreams everyone had called impossible were actually inevitable. When do we start? Elena's grin was fierce and proud. We already have. Tomorrow morning, you have a meeting with the legal team to finalize your CEO appointment. Tomorrow afternoon, we announce Morrison Enterprises to the world. By tomorrow night, everyone who ever doubted you will know exactly who Jake Morrison really is. As I left the Meridian building that evening, I realized that the scared young man who'd been humiliated in this same elevator 7 years ago was gone forever. In his place was someone I barely recognized, someone with the power to change the world, and the responsibility to use that power wisely. The real test was just beginning. The Morrison Enterprises headquarters occupied 4 floors of the newest skyscraper in downtown San Francisco, with panoramic views of the bay and a reception area that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. As I walked through the glass doors for the first time as CEO, wearing a custom-tailored charcoal suit that cost more than my old car, I felt like I was stepping into someone else's life. The press conference was scheduled for 2 p.m., which gave me exactly 3 hours to transform from Jake Morrison, the freelance web designer, into J.M. Morrison, founder and CEO, of what the Wall Street Journal was already calling, quote, the most anticipated tech launch of the decade. Elena had spent the morning briefing me on media strategy, investor relations, and the carefully orchestrated campaign that would introduce Morrison Enterprises to the world. But she'd also made one thing crystal clear. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was about choosing how I wanted to be remembered. The technology speaks for itself, she'd said over coffee in my new corner office. The financial projections are undeniable, but today is about something bigger. Today is about showing the world that innovation comes from unexpected places, and that the people who get knocked down hardest sometimes get back up strongest. At 1:45 p.m., I stood behind the curtain in the building's main conference room, listening to the murmur of voices from what sounded like a massive crowd. Marcus appeared beside me with his tablet, looking calm and professional despite the magnitude of what was about to happen. Final headcount is 127, he reported. Journalists from TechCrunch, Wired, Forbes, Wall Street Journal, and Bloomberg. Representatives from Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan, and Blackstone. 7 venture capital firms, including Andreessen Horowitz and Sequoia Capital. Any familiar faces? Marcus's expression grew carefully neutral. Sarah Blackwood arrived 20 minutes ago. Victoria is with her. My pulse quickened. What about David Sterling? Front row center. Sterling Capital Management apparently has significant interest in getting in on the ground floor of whatever we're announcing. I took a deep breath, adjusting my tie and checking my reflection in the glass partition. The man looking back at me was someone I barely recognized. Confident, powerful, ready to change the world. But underneath the expensive suit and professional demeanor, I was still the scared kid who'd bombed that presentation 7 years ago. Are you ready for this? Marcus asked. No, I admitted. But I'm doing it anyway. Elena appeared at my other side, elegant in a black blazer and pearls, carrying herself with the authority of someone who'd launched dozens of billion-dollar companies. Remember, Jake, today isn't about revenge, it's about revolution. The curtain lifted, and I walked onto a stage facing an audience that represented the most powerful people in technology and finance. Camera flashes erupted like lightning, and I could see dozens of phones recording every step I took toward the podium. The room fell silent as I reached the microphone. 7 years ago, I began, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I stood in a conference room not far from here and pitched an idea that everyone said was impossible. Artificial intelligence that could predict consumer behavior. Algorithms that could help small businesses compete with major corporations. Technology that could revolutionize retail commerce by understanding what people wanted before they knew they wanted it. I paused, letting my eyes sweep across the audience. In the third row, I spotted Victoria sitting rigidly beside her mother, her face pale but her expression unreadable. I was told that the technology didn't exist, that the computing power was too expensive, that the idea was, quote, technologically unfeasible and fundamentally flawed. I looked directly at Sarah Blackwood as I said those words, seeing recognition flicker across her features. I was told to consider more realistic career options. A murmur rippled through the audience. Several journalists were already typing furiously on their laptops. Today I'm here to announce that those impossible ideas have become reality. Morrison Enterprises has spent the past 18 months proving that artificial intelligence can revolutionize commerce, create jobs, and level the playing field between small businesses and corporate giants. The screen behind me lit up with the Morrison Enterprises logo, a sleek, modern design that somehow managed to look both cutting-edge and timeless. Our proprietary AI platform has already generated over $50 million in value across 4 major industries. We've helped 47 small businesses increase their revenue by an average of 31%. We've reduced global shipping inefficiencies by 12%, saving international commerce over $400 million annually. We've created the first retail development in history, with 100% occupancy and 0 business failures. More murmurs, louder this time. I could see people in the audience pulling out their phones, probably fact-checking my claims in real time. But Morrison Enterprises isn't just about technology. It's about proving that innovation comes from unexpected places. That the ideas dismissed as fantasies today might be the foundations of tomorrow's economy. That failure isn't the end of the story. It's just the first chapter. I clicked to the next slide, showing a map of the United States with thousands of red dots representing potential expansion opportunities. Starting next month, we're launching Morrison Local, a nationwide network that will bring our AI platform to small businesses in every state. Restaurant owners will be able to predict which menu items will be popular weeks before their customers order them. Retail stores will know exactly which products to stock for maximum profitability. Service businesses will identify customer needs before those customers even realize they exist. The energy in the room was shifting. I could see people leaning forward, phones being put away as they focused on what I was saying rather than just recording it. But Morrison Local is just the beginning. Morrison Global will extend our platform to international markets, helping businesses worldwide optimize their operations and better serve their customers. Morrison Predictive will offer our forecasting technology to major corporations, not to replace human decision-making, but to augment it with insights that were previously impossible to obtain. I clicked to a slide showing projected revenue figures that made several people in the audience audibly gasp. Within 5 years, we project Morrison Enterprises will be valued at over $20 billion. But more importantly, we project our technology will help create over 100,000 new jobs, save small businesses collectively more than $10 billion in operational costs, and fundamentally change how commerce works in the 21st century. The room was completely silent now, everyone hanging on every word. This technology exists because someone was willing to fail spectacularly and then get back up. It exists because sometimes the most important innovations come from people who have nothing left to lose and everything to prove. It exists because the future belongs to those who refuse to accept that their dreams are impossible. I paused again, looking out at an audience that 7 years ago would have laughed me out of the room. I want to address something before we open for questions. There are people in this room who knew me 7 years ago. People who watched me fail, who told me to give up, who suggested I wasn't cut out for this industry. My eyes found Victoria's, and for a moment the entire audience faded away. To those people, I want to say thank you. Victoria's composure cracked slightly, confusion flickering across her face. Thank you for teaching me that validation has to come from within. Thank you for showing me that the only approval that matters is the approval of the customers whose lives you improve. Thank you for proving that sometimes the best thing that can happen to a dreamer is having everyone stop believing in their dreams, because that's when you discover whether you really believe in them yourself. The applause started slowly, then built into something thunderous. I could see Victoria staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, not hatred, but something closer to awe. Now I'd be happy to take your questions. Hands shot up across the room. I pointed to a journalist from TechCrunch in the front row. Jake. Sorry, Mr. Morrison. Can you walk us through the specific algorithms that power your platform? What makes Morrison's AI different from existing recommendation engines? I launched into a technical explanation that I'd rehearsed dozens of times with Elena, but as I spoke, I realized I wasn't just reciting talking points. I was sharing something I genuinely understood and believed in. The technology wasn't just a product to me. It was proof that ideas could survive failure, that innovation could emerge from desperation, that 7 years of doubt and struggle could lead to something extraordinary. The questions continued for 45 minutes. Revenue models, expansion timelines, competitive advantages, regulatory compliance. I answered each one with growing confidence, drawing on 18 months of real-world experience that I was only now beginning to fully understand. Finally, Sarah Blackwood raised her hand. The room went silent. Everyone knew who she was, and several people had clearly connected her to my opening comments about being rejected 7 years ago. Ms. Blackwood, I said, my voice carefully neutral. She stood slowly, her expression unreadable. Mr. Morrison, 7 years ago, Meridian Ventures passed on investing in your original concept. Looking at what you've built since then, do you view that decision as a mistake? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Everyone in the room was watching to see how I'd respond. This was my moment for revenge, my chance to humiliate the woman who'd crushed my dreams in front of everyone who mattered. Instead, I smiled. Ms. Blackwood, I think that rejection was the best thing that ever happened to me. If Meridian Ventures had funded Innovate Solutions 7 years ago, I probably would have built a decent company that made modest profits and eventually got acquired by a larger corporation. Instead, I had to figure out how to prove my ideas worked without anyone's help. I had to test them in the real world, refine them based on actual results, and build something that was genuinely revolutionary rather than just incrementally better. I paused, looking directly at her. Sometimes the most valuable investment a venture capital firm can make in an entrepreneur is the investment of rejection. It forces you to become stronger, smarter, and more determined than you ever would have been with easy money. The applause was immediate and sustained. Sarah Blackwood sat down slowly, and I could see something in her expression that might have been respect. "One final question," I announced, pointing to a reporter from Forbes. "Mr. Morrison, what's next for you personally? How do you plan to handle the transition from anonymity to being CEO of a major corporation?" It was a good question, one I'd been wrestling with for days. The hardest part isn't the business side. It's remembering why I started this journey in the first place. I didn't build this technology to become famous or wealthy. I built it to solve problems and help people. My job as CEO is to make sure Morrison Enterprises never loses sight of that mission, no matter how big we get. As the press conference ended and people began filing out, I found myself surrounded by business cards and investment offers. Venture capitalists who'd ignored me for years were suddenly very interested in getting to know me better. Journalists wanted exclusive interviews. Corporate executives wanted partnership meetings. But through the crowd, I saw Victoria approaching. She moved slowly, almost hesitantly, as if she wasn't sure she'd be welcome. When she reached me, she stood silently for a moment, studying my face as if trying to reconcile the man in front of her with the person she thought she knew. "Jake," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I owe you an apology." "You don't owe me anything, Victoria." "Yes, I do." Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I should have believed in you. I should have supported you when things got difficult instead of walking away. I should have seen what Elena saw, that you weren't just a dreamer, you were someone who could make dreams real." The hurt I'd carried for 7 years was still there, but it felt smaller somehow, less important than I'd expected. "We were different people then, we wanted different things. What I wanted was security," she said. "What you wanted was to change the world. I was too scared to bet on changing the world." Marcus appeared at my elbow, tablet in hand. "Sir, your car is ready. You have the Goldman Sachs meeting in 30 minutes. Goldman Sachs. 6 months ago, I'd been designing websites for pizza shops. Now I was taking meetings with one of the most powerful investment banks in the world. "Victoria," I said, "I hope you understand that this isn't about proving you wrong. It's about proving that everyone deserves a second chance to become who they're meant to be." She nodded, stepping aside as I moved toward the exit, but as I reached the door I heard her voice one more time. "Jake? For what it's worth, I always knew you were extraordinary. I just didn't know if being extraordinary was enough." I turned back to her, seeing not the woman who'd broken my heart, but someone who'd been just as scared as I was, just in a different way. "It is," I said. "It always was." As I walked out of the building that afternoon, I realized that the revenge I'd fantasized about for years wasn't what I'd expected. It wasn't bitter or satisfying. It was just complete. The chapter of my life that began with failure and humiliation was finally closed. Tomorrow would begin a new chapter, one where the scared young man with impossible dreams had become the CEO with the power to make those dreams reality. The boy who'd been told to be realistic had just announced to the world that reality was far more extraordinary than anyone had imagined. 2 weeks after the press conference that changed everything, I was sitting in my corner office at Morrison Enterprises, reviewing acquisition proposals from 3 different Fortune 500 companies, when Marcus burst through my door with an expression I'd never seen before. His usual calm professionalism was replaced by something that looked like barely controlled panic. "Sir, we have a problem, a big one." I looked up from the contracts spread across my desk. "What kind of problem?" Marcus placed his tablet in front of me, showing a news article from Tech Insider with a headline that made my blood run cold. "Morrison Enterprises under federal investigation for securities fraud and data theft." "This went live 8 minutes ago," Marcus said. It's already trending on social media, and our stock price has dropped 12% in pre-market trading. I read the article quickly, my disbelief growing with each paragraph. According to the report, Morrison Enterprises was being investigated by the Securities and Exchange Commission for allegedly using stolen proprietary algorithms from other companies. The article claimed I had built my AI platform by reverse engineering code from Amazon, Google, and several smaller tech firms. But that wasn't the worst part. The article also alleged that Morrison Analytics had been selling client data to foreign corporations without consent, violating federal privacy laws and potentially compromising national security. This is completely fabricated, I said, looking up at Marcus. Every line of code in our platform is original. We've never sold client data to anyone, foreign or domestic. I know that, and you know that, but the SEC doesn't know that yet. They've issued a formal investigation notice, which means we have 72 hours to provide documentation proving the originality of our algorithms and the legitimacy of our data practices. My phone started buzzing with calls from reporters, investors, and business partners. The carefully constructed empire that had taken 18 months to build was under attack, and I had no idea who was behind it or how to stop it. "There is more," Marcus said grimly. He swiped to another article, this one from a financial blog called Silicon Valley Insider. The headline read, "The Jake Morrison You Don't Know, A History of Failed Ventures and Questionable Business Practices." This article was more personal, detailing my failed startup from 7 years ago and painting it as evidence of a pattern of deception and incompetence. It included quotes from anonymous sources claiming I had a history of overpromising and underdelivering, that I'd misrepresented my qualifications to investors, and that Morrison Enterprises was just another elaborate scheme destined to collapse. "Anonymous sources," I muttered. "How convenient." "The timing isn't coincidental," Marcus observed. "Someone waited until we had maximum visibility and then launched a coordinated attack designed to destroy our credibility." Before I could respond, my office door opened and Elena walked in, her face grim. She was followed by a man I didn't recognize. Tall, silver-haired, wearing the kind of expensive suit that screamed corporate lawyer. "Jake, this is Richard Caldwell from Morrison & Associates," Elena said. "Our legal team." Caldwell extended his hand with the firm grip of someone accustomed to handling crises. "Mr. Morrison, I've been retained to handle the SEC investigation and coordinate our response to these allegations." "How bad is it?" I asked. "Potentially catastrophic," Caldwell said bluntly. "The SEC investigation alone could take months to resolve, during which time your business operations will be severely limited. The negative publicity could cost you millions in lost contracts and investment opportunities. But the real danger is that these allegations are sophisticated enough to suggest they came from someone with inside knowledge of your operations." "Inside knowledge?" Elena's expression was troubled. "Someone who knows enough about our business model to craft believable lies. Someone who understands our client relationships and technology partnerships well enough to make the accusations sound credible." My phone rang again. This time it was David Sterling. "Jake," he said when I answered, his voice tense. "I just saw the news. Sterling Capital Management needs to discuss our investment position in Morrison Enterprises. Can you meet this afternoon?" "Of course. Is there a problem?" "Let's just say our investors are concerned about the allegations. We need to understand the full scope of the situation before we can determine our continued involvement." After he hung up, I realized this was exactly what the attackers had hoped for. The investigation wasn't just about legal compliance. It was about destroying confidence in Morrison Enterprises among investors, partners, and clients. "We need to figure out who's behind this," I said to Elena. "These aren't random attacks. Someone is orchestrating this campaign." "I have some ideas," Elena replied. "But first, we need to focus on damage control. Richard, what's our immediate strategy?" Caldwell opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "We respond to the SEC inquiry with complete transparency. Every document, every algorithm, every data transaction gets documented and submitted. We hire an independent auditing firm to verify our compliance with all federal regulations. And we prepare for a media counteroffensive." "What kind of counteroffensive?" We tell your story. The real story. How you built this technology from scratch. How you've helped small businesses thrive. How Morrison Enterprises represents genuine innovation rather than corporate theft. But we need to be careful. One misstep in our response could make things worse. The rest of the day was a blur of emergency meetings, legal consultations, and crisis management sessions. By evening, we'd assembled a team of lawyers, accountants, and public relations specialists, all working to save Morrison Enterprises from an attack that seemed designed to destroy everything I'd built. At 8 p.m., I was alone in my office, reviewing documents with Caldwell, when Marcus announced that Victoria was in the lobby asking to see me. "Send her up," I said, curious about why she'd come. Victoria appeared in my doorway a few minutes later, looking nervous but determined. She wore a simple black dress and carried herself with less confidence than I'd seen from her since high school. "Jake, I know this is a terrible time, but I needed to see you. If you're here to gloat about my problems, you can save it. I'm not in the mood." "I'm not here to gloat, I'm here to warn you." That got my attention. "Warn me about what?" Victoria closed the door behind her and took a seat across from my desk. 3 days ago, my mother received a visit from someone claiming to represent a consortium of investors interested in acquiring failing tech companies. They asked detailed questions about Morrison Enterprises, your business model, your technology, your key partnerships. And my mother told them everything she knew, which admittedly wasn't much. But then they asked about you personally. Your background, your previous failures, your relationship with me. They seemed particularly interested in anything that could be used to question your credibility. I felt a chill run down my spine. "Did your mother get their names?" "They gave fake names, but I did some research afterward. The business cards they left trace back to a shell corporation registered in Delaware. The same corporation that owns 3 of the financial blogs that publish negative articles about you today. Someone hired a team to destroy my reputation." "It gets worse," Victoria continued. "That same consortium approached several of Morrison's smaller clients, offering to buy out their contracts at above-market rates. They're trying to destabilize your customer base while you're dealing with the SEC investigation." Marcus appeared in the doorway. "Sir, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have another problem. Santino's Pizza just called to cancel their contract. So did the Mission Boutique and Bella's Hair Studio." My heart sank. Those were my original clients, the businesses that had proven my technology worked. If they were abandoning Morrison Enterprises, it meant the attack was succeeding. "Why?" I asked. "What reason did they give?" They said they received official-looking letters claiming that using Morrison's services could expose them to federal liability if the SEC investigation results in criminal charges. The letters advised them to terminate their contracts immediately to avoid legal complications. Victoria's face went pale. "Fake legal threats. That's a classic corporate warfare tactic." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the San Francisco skyline. 2 weeks ago, I'd been on top of the world. Now I was watching everything I'd built crumble under a carefully orchestrated attack by enemies I couldn't even identify. "There's something else," Victoria said quietly. "Something I should have told you earlier." I turned back to her. "What?" "David Sterling. The man you met at the reunion, who seemed so interested in investing in Morrison Enterprises. He's not just a venture capitalist. He's also engaged to my cousin Rebecca." So Rebecca works for Blackwood Consulting, my family's firm. She has access to all our client files, including detailed analyses of every company we've ever evaluated. If David wanted inside information about Morrison Enterprises, Rebecca could have provided it. The pieces were starting to come together. "You think David Sterling is behind this attack?" "I think David Sterling saw Morrison Enterprises as a threat to his existing investments. If your technology is as revolutionary as you claim, it could disrupt several companies in his portfolio. Instead of competing with you fairly, he decided to destroy you." Marcus consulted his tablet. "That would explain the sophistication of the attack. Sterling Capital Management has enough resources to hire the best corporate warfare specialists in the country." "But why would Rebecca help him?" I asked Victoria. Victoria's expression was painful, because she's always resented me for leaving the family business to start my own consulting firm. If she could destroy my ex-boyfriend's company while helping her fiancé eliminate a business threat, she'd see it as killing two birds with one stone. I sat back down, trying to process this information. The attack on Morrison Enterprises wasn't just about business. It was personal. David Sterling saw me as a threat to his financial interests, and Rebecca saw me as an opportunity to hurt Victoria while advancing her own position. "Can you prove any of this?" Caldwell asked Victoria. "Not directly, but I might be able to get Rebecca to admit something if I approached her the right way. She's always been competitive with me, and she loves to brag when she thinks she's winning." "That's too dangerous," I said. "If you're right about Rebecca being involved, confronting her could make things worse for all of us." Victoria met my eyes with an intensity I remembered from our college days. "Jake, I spent 7 years regretting how I failed you when you needed support. I'm not going to fail you again." Before I could stop her, she was already pulling out her phone. "Rebecca, it's Victoria. I was hoping we could meet for coffee tomorrow morning. There's something I need to discuss with you about Jake Morrison and this whole SEC investigation mess." I could hear Rebecca's voice through the phone, eager and slightly smug. They agreed to meet at a cafe in Pacific Heights at 10 a.m. After Victoria hung up, she looked at me with determination. "I'm going to wear a wire and get her to confess to whatever she and David have been doing." "Absolutely not," I said. "That's illegal wiretapping, and it could land you in jail." "Not if I'm working with federal investigators," Caldwell interjected. "If the SEC believes there's evidence of market manipulation and corporate sabotage, they might be willing to authorize a controlled operation." "You'd do that?" I asked Victoria. "You'd risk your career and potentially your freedom to help me?" Victoria's smile was sad but genuine. 7 years ago, I chose safety over loyalty. I chose my family's approval over supporting the man I loved. I've regretted that choice every day since. This is my chance to finally do the right thing. As she left my office that night, I realized that the attack on Morrison Enterprises had revealed something unexpected. It had shown me who my real allies were, and it had given Victoria a chance to redeem herself for the betrayal that had haunted both of us for years. But it had also shown me just how ruthless the business world could be when billions of dollars were at stake. David Sterling and Rebecca weren't just trying to destroy my company, they were trying to destroy me personally, to ensure I'd never be able to rebuild or threaten their interests again. The next 24 hours would determine whether Morrison Enterprises survived its greatest test, and whether I had the strength to fight back against enemies who played by rules I was only beginning to understand. As I prepared for what might be the most important day of my professional life, I realized that all the success in the world meant nothing if you didn't have people willing to stand with you when everything fell apart. Tomorrow, I'd find out who those people really were. The FBI field office in downtown San Francisco was nothing like what I'd expected. Instead of the sterile, intimidating environment I'd imagined, Agent Sarah Chen's office felt more like a corporate conference room, complete with coffee service and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay. What made it surreal was sitting across from Victoria, who was wearing a wire barely visible beneath her silk blouse, preparing to record a confession that could send her own cousin to federal prison. "Ms. Blackwood," Agent Chen said, reviewing the recording equipment one final time, "I want to make sure you understand the risks. If Rebecca suspects what you're doing, she could become hostile or even violent. We'll have surveillance teams nearby, but there's always an element of danger in these operations." Victoria nodded calmly, though I could see her hands trembling slightly. "I understand. But if we don't get this evidence, Jake's company will be destroyed, and David Sterling will get away with corporate sabotage. The device is voice-activated and has a 6-hour battery life," Agent Chen continued. "Try to get Rebecca to explicitly discuss her involvement in the SEC investigation, the media attacks, and any coordination with David Sterling. The more specific details she provides, the stronger our case becomes." As Victoria prepared to leave for her meeting with Rebecca, I felt a mixture of gratitude and terror. This woman who had once abandoned me in my darkest hour was now risking everything to save the empire I'd built from the ashes of that abandonment. "Victoria," I said as she reached the door, "you don't have to do this. We can find another way." She turned back with a smile that reminded me of the girl I'd fallen in love with in college. Jake, for 7 years I've been living with the knowledge that I failed you when you needed me most. This isn't just about saving Morrison Enterprises. This is about finally becoming the person I should have been back then. After she left, Agent Chen and I moved to a surveillance van parked 3 blocks from the cafe where Victoria and Rebecca were meeting. Through sophisticated audio equipment, we could hear every word of their conversation in real time. The first 20 minutes were painful to listen to. Rebecca was smugly gloating about my downfall, describing in detail how the SEC investigation had, quote, finally exposed Jake Morrison as the fraud he always was. She seemed to take particular pleasure in Victoria's apparent distress over my situation. I have to admit, Rebecca said over the clink of coffee cups, David's plan was brilliant. Instead of trying to compete with Morrison Enterprises directly, he identified the weak points in Jake's operation and exploited them systematically. What do you mean? Victoria asked, her voice carefully neutral. Well, the SEC investigation wasn't random. David's team identified former employees of companies that Jake allegedly stole code from. They coached these people on what to say to federal investigators to make the accusations sound credible. Agent Chen and I exchanged glances. This was exactly what we needed. Rebecca continued, her voice growing more excited as she revealed details of the conspiracy. The media campaign was even more sophisticated. David hired a public relations firm that specializes in corporate character assassination. They created fake sources, planted stories in financial blogs, and coordinated the timing to maximize damage to Morrison's stock price. But wasn't that illegal? Victoria asked. Technically, yes, but it's almost impossible to prove unless you have inside knowledge of the operation. David was careful to use shell corporations and offshore accounts to hide his involvement. What about the client defections? How did David convince Jake's customers to abandon their contracts? Rebecca laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. That was my contribution. I used Blackwood Consulting's legal letterhead to create official-looking warnings about potential federal liability. The letters weren't technically fraudulent because they didn't claim to represent any specific government agency. They just implied certain risks that might or might not exist. Agent Chen was taking notes rapidly, building a case file that would be impossible for Sterling and Rebecca to dispute. The beautiful part, Rebecca continued, is that even if the SEC investigation clears Jake of any wrongdoing, the damage to his reputation will be permanent. Investors don't forget fraud allegations, even when they're proven false. Morrison Enterprises will never recover the credibility needed to compete at the highest levels. You seem very confident about that, Victoria observed. I should be. David and I have been planning this for months. Ever since the press conference, where Jake humiliated my aunt in front of the entire tech industry, we knew something had to be done. The Morrison Group was becoming too powerful, too disruptive. David's existing investments were threatened, and our family's reputation was damaged. This operation kills 2 birds with 1 stone. There it was, a complete confession to conspiracy, fraud, market manipulation, and corporate sabotage. Agent Chen smiled grimly as she made additional notes. But Rebecca wasn't finished. The real genius is that Jake will never figure out who was behind it. He'll spend years wondering who destroyed his company, never realizing it was the people sitting right in front of him at that reunion. What happens now? Victoria asked. Now we wait for Morrison Enterprises to collapse completely. David estimates another 2 weeks before Jake is forced to sell his assets at fire sale prices. Sterling Capital Management will acquire the technology for pennies on the dollar, and David will own the AI platform that would have made Jake Morrison a billionaire. And Jake? Rebecca's voice turned cold. Jake will go back to designing websites for pizza shops where he belongs. Some people are meant to change the world, Victoria. Others are meant to serve coffee to the people who actually matter. I felt anger surge through me, but Agent Chen placed a restraining hand on my arm. We have everything we need, she whispered. Let's not compromise the operation now. Victoria's voice came through the speakers one more time. Rebecca, I have to ask, don't you feel any guilt about destroying someone's life like this? Guilt? Rebecca laughed again. Victoria, you of all people should understand. You walked away from Jake once because you realized he wasn't worth the risk. At least you were smart enough to cut your losses early. David and I are just finishing what you started 7 years ago." The cruelty in her voice was breathtaking. But what happened next surprised everyone. "Actually, Rebecca," Victoria said, her voice suddenly clear and strong, "I think you misunderstood something important about my relationship with Jake." "What's that?" "I didn't leave him because he wasn't worth the risk. I left him because I wasn't brave enough to take the risk. There's a difference. Jake Morrison is exactly the kind of person who changes the world. The problem was never with him. It was with me." Agent Chen and I looked at each other in surprise. This wasn't part of the plan. "I spent 7 years regretting my decision to abandon Jake," Victoria continued. "But thanks to your confession, I finally have a chance to make things right." "My confession?" "Victoria, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that you just admitted to federal crimes while wearing a wire for the FBI. David Sterling's plan to destroy Morrison Enterprises just became evidence in a federal case that will send both of you to prison." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Rebecca's voice, shrill with panic. "You're lying. You wouldn't do that to your family." "You're right that family is important, Rebecca. But Jake taught me something that our family never understood. Sometimes doing the right thing matters more than protecting people who don't deserve protection." We heard the sound of chairs scraping, footsteps, and Rebecca's voice fading as she apparently fled the cafe. Agent Chen was already coordinating with field teams to arrest both Rebecca and David Sterling before they could destroy evidence or leave the country. 3 hours later, I was back in my office at Morrison Enterprises, watching news reports of the arrests on every major network. The story had everything journalists loved: corporate espionage, family betrayal, a tech CEO fighting for his company's survival, and a love story about redemption and second chances. Marcus burst into my office with his tablet, grinning wider than I'd ever seen. "Sir, you need to see this. Morrison's stock price has jumped 47% since the arrests were announced. We're getting calls from investors who want to triple their commitments. Goldman Sachs is requesting an emergency meeting to discuss a major partnership expansion." But the best news came from an unexpected source. Santino called personally to apologize for canceling his contract and to ask if Morrison Analytics could help him expand to 3 new locations. Bella's hair studio wanted to implement our system in her sister's salon in Seattle. The Mission Boutique was planning a second store and insisted on using Morrison's predictive algorithms to stock it. "It's not just about the technology anymore," Marcus observed. "People want to do business with Morrison Enterprises because they believe in the story. They want to be part of something that survived an attack like this and came out stronger." That evening, Elena hosted a celebration dinner on the Meridian. The yacht's main deck was decorated with lights that reflected off the calm waters of the bay, and the San Francisco skyline provided a stunning backdrop for what felt like a victory party. But as the night progressed, I found myself standing alone at the railing, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The failure 7 years ago that had seemed like the end of my dreams. The years of struggle and self-doubt. The unexpected second chance that had led to Morrison Enterprises. The attack that had nearly destroyed everything. And finally, the redemption that had proven something I'd never quite believed, that sometimes the people who knock you down can also be the ones who help you get back up. Victoria appeared beside me holding 2 glasses of champagne. "Penny, for your thoughts?" I accepted the glass and took a sip before answering. "I was thinking about how different this feels from what I expected." "Different how?" 7 years ago, when you left, I fantasized about this moment. The moment when I'd be successful enough to prove that you were wrong about me. I imagined you regretting your decision, maybe even begging me to take you back." Victoria was quiet, waiting for me to continue. "But now that it's actually happened, I realize that revenge fantasies are just another kind of prison. They keep you focused on the past instead of building the future." "So you're not interested in making me beg?" Victoria asked with a slight smile. I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in years without the filter of hurt and anger. She was still beautiful, still intelligent, still the woman I'd once planned to marry. But I was no longer the man who had needed her validation to feel worthwhile. Victoria, what you did today, risking your career and your relationship with your family to help me, that took more courage than anything I've ever done. You've already proven that you're not the same person who walked away 7 years ago. And you're not the same person I walked away from. We stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the lights of the city reflect off the water. So what happens now? Victoria asked. Between us, I mean. It was a fair question, one I'd been avoiding all day. I don't know, I admitted. We're both different people than we were 7 years ago. Maybe we should take time to figure out who we are now before we decide if those people belong together. Victoria nodded, understanding. You know, for someone who used to be terrible at relationships, you've gotten remarkably wise. Failure is an excellent teacher. It just takes a while to understand the lessons. Marcus appeared at my elbow with his ever-present tablet. Sir, I hate to interrupt, but there's been a development. The Department of Justice wants to discuss using Morrison's AI platform to identify and prevent corporate fraud. They're talking about a potential $100 million contract. $100 million. 2 years ago, I'd been living paycheck to paycheck. Now I was being offered government contracts worth more money than I'd ever imagined. But as I looked around the yacht, at the celebration happening because good had triumphed over corruption, at Victoria, who had risked everything to help me, at Elena, who had believed in me when no one else would, I realized that the money wasn't the real victory. The real victory was proving that dreams don't have expiration dates, that failure isn't permanent unless you let it be, that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the foundation for the best thing that ever happens to you. Marcus, I said, schedule the DOJ meeting for next week. But first, I want you to set up a meeting with the Small Business Administration. If Morrison Enterprises is going to change the world, I want to make sure we start with the people who need help the most. As the party continued around us, I found myself thinking about a scared young man who had walked into a conference room 7 years ago, with dreams bigger than his ability to execute them. That man had been destroyed by failure, humiliated by the people he'd trusted, and abandoned by the woman he'd loved. But destruction isn't always permanent. Sometimes it's just preparation for reconstruction. Morrison Enterprises would go on to become one of the most successful technology companies of the decade. Our AI platform would help millions of small businesses compete with corporate giants. The predictive algorithms I developed would revolutionize everything from retail commerce to disaster relief. But none of that success meant as much as the lesson I'd learned along the way, that the measure of a person isn't whether they fall down, but whether they choose to get back up. And when they do get back up, sometimes they discover they're stronger than they ever imagined possible. Standing on the deck of my yacht, watching the city lights twinkle like stars fall into earth, I finally understood what Elena had tried to tell me that first night. Power isn't about proving other people wrong. Power is about proving yourself right. 1 year later, I stood in the main conference room of Morrison Enterprises, addressing an audience that would have been unimaginable just 18 months earlier. The United Nations Technology Council had invited me to present Morrison's Global Impact Initiative, a program designed to bring artificial intelligence solutions to developing economies around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, looking out at delegates from 47 countries. Today we're announcing the largest technology transfer program in history. Morrison Enterprises will provide our AI platform free of charge to small businesses in emerging markets, along with training and support to help local entrepreneurs build sustainable enterprises. The program represented everything Morrison had become, not just a profitable company, but a force for positive change. We'd moved beyond the revenge fantasies and ego-driven competition that had nearly destroyed us. Instead, we were focused on something that mattered more than market dominalization: human potential. Elena sat in the front row, beaming with pride. At 73, she'd officially retired from day-to-day operations, but remained as Morrison's chairman emeritus. Her investment in my impossible dreams had generated returns that exceeded even her wildest projections. But she often said her greatest satisfaction came from watching me grow into a leader worthy of the power she'd helped me achieve. After the presentation, as delegates from various countries surrounded me with questions and partnership proposals, I noticed a familiar figure waiting near the back of the room. Thomas Chen, not Marcus, my assistant, but the actual Thomas Chen from my high school debate team, now serving as Deputy Secretary of Commerce. Jake Morrison, he said when I finally reached him, shaking his head in amazement. I have to admit, when I saw you at the reunion last year, I never imagined you were the same J.M. Morrison, whose algorithms were revolutionizing international trade. Sometimes the biggest transformations happen in silence, I replied. People see the end result, but they miss the years of work that made it possible. The Commerce Department wants to discuss implementing Morrison's predictive analytics across all federal trade agencies. We're talking about a partnership that could reshape how America engages with global markets. Federal partnership. A year ago, I'd been designing websites for local restaurants. Now, the United States government wanted to base its international trade strategy on technology I'd developed in my studio apartment. Thomas, I'd be honored to explore that possibility. But I want to make sure any government partnership includes provisions for small business development and economic opportunity in underserved communities. Absolutely. In fact, that's part of what makes Morrison Enterprises so attractive as a partner. You've proven that advanced technology can be deployed in ways that lift up entire communities rather than just enriching corporations. That evening, I hosted a private dinner on the Meridian for the international delegates who'd expressed interest in participating in the Global Impact Initiative. The Yacht's dining room had been converted into an elegant conference space where representatives from Kenya, Vietnam, Peru, and Bangladesh could discuss how Morrison's technology might address their unique economic challenges. Dr. Amara Okafor, Nigeria's Minister of Technology and Innovation, raised a question that cut to the heart of what we were trying to accomplish. Mr. Morrison, how do we ensure that artificial intelligence serves local communities rather than displacing traditional economic structures? It was the right question, one that went beyond profit margins and market penetration to address the fundamental responsibility that came with technological power. Dr. Okafor, that's exactly why we're starting with small businesses and local entrepreneurs, rather than trying to impose solutions from the outside. Morrison's platform learns from existing patterns of commerce and customer behavior. It amplifies what's already working, rather than replacing it with something foreign. I pulled up case studies from our pilot programs in rural America, showing how Morrison's algorithms had helped a family farm in Iowa increase crop yields by 23%, while reducing water usage by 31%. Another example showed how a furniture maker in North Carolina had expanded from local sales to international markets using predictive analytics to identify global demand for handcrafted products. The goal isn't to modernize traditional businesses out of existence, I continued. It's to give traditional businesses the tools they need to compete and thrive in a global economy. Victoria appeared at my side as the formal dinner transitioned into informal networking conversations. She'd spent the past year rebuilding her own consulting practice, focusing on ethical business development and corporate social responsibility. The scandal involving her cousin Rebecca had initially damaged her reputation, but her role in exposing the conspiracy against Morrison had ultimately enhanced her credibility as someone who prioritized integrity over family loyalty. Impressive evening, she said, gesturing toward the animated discussions happening throughout the dining room. A year ago, you were fighting for your company's survival. Now you're reshaping international economic policy. A year ago, I was still thinking like someone who'd been knocked down. Now I'm thinking like someone who's responsible for helping others stand up. Victoria smiled, but I could see something thoughtful in her expression. Jake, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you ever miss it? The simplicity of just being angry at the world for not believing in you? It was a perceptive question, one that touched on something I'd been grappling with as Morrison Enterprises grew beyond anything I'd originally envisioned. Sometimes, I admitted, anger is a powerful motivator. It's clean, focused, and easy to understand. But it's also limiting. When you're driven by proving other people wrong, you're still letting other people define your goals. And now? Now I'm driven by proving that the world can be better than people think it can be. It's harder, because success becomes about more than just personal achievement. But it's also more sustainable, because it doesn't depend on anyone else's validation. The conversation was interrupted by Marcus approaching with his tablet and the slightly urgent expression that meant something important required my attention. Sir, we have a situation that requires immediate decision-making. 3 separate countries have made formal requests to license Morrison's technology for their national economic development programs. South Korea is offering a $2 billion licensing agreement. Brazil wants to establish a joint venture worth $1.8 billion. And the European Union is proposing a continent-wide implementation valued at over $5 billion. $5 billion. The number was so large it felt abstract, like a figure from someone else's life. What's the timeline for responses? South Korea wants an answer within 48 hours. They're concerned that delays could impact their next fiscal planning cycle. Brazil and the EU are more flexible, but they're also making it clear that this level of opportunity won't remain available indefinitely. Victoria looked at me with amazement. Jake, do you realize what this means? You're not just successful, you're on the verge of becoming one of the most powerful technology leaders in the world. But as I considered the magnitude of these offers, I found myself thinking about Santino's Pizza, about Bella's hair studio, about the Mission Boutique, the small businesses that had trusted me when I was nobody special, that had helped me prove my theories could work in the real world. Marcus, schedule calls with all 3 delegations for tomorrow morning. But before we discuss licensing agreements, I want to understand their commitment to small business development and local entrepreneurship. Sir, these aren't just technology deals. They're partnerships that could affect millions of people's livelihoods. If we're going to license Morrison's platform globally, we need to ensure it's implemented in ways that create opportunities for individuals and families, not just corporate profits. Elena appeared at our conversation, having overheard the discussion about international licensing deals. At 73, she'd seen enough technology transfers to understand both the opportunities and the dangers. Jake's instincts are correct, she said to Marcus. The real value of Morrison's technology isn't just its efficiency, it's its democratizing potential. If we license it to governments that will only use it to benefit large corporations, we'll have wasted the most important aspect of what we've built. So what do you recommend? I asked her. Structure the licensing agreements to require that at least 60% of the technology implementation focus on small business development and local economic opportunity. Make job creation and entrepreneurship support mandatory components of any partnership. It was a bold proposal, one that would significantly complicate the negotiations and potentially reduce the financial terms of the agreements. But it was also the right thing to do, the choice that honored the values that had guided Morrison Enterprises from the beginning. Marcus, add those requirements to our negotiation parameters. Any country that wants to license Morrison's technology will need to demonstrate a genuine commitment to using it for broad-based economic development. As the evening wound down and the international delegates departed for their hotels, I found myself alone on the yacht's upper deck with Elena. The San Francisco Bay stretched out before us, peaceful and infinite, under a canopy of stars. "You've changed," Elena observed, settling into one of the comfortable deck chairs. "How so?" "A year ago, you were still fighting for respect, still trying to prove that you belonged in the same room as successful people. Tonight you turned down potentially billions of dollars because the deals didn't align with your values. That's not the behavior of someone who's still seeking validation." She was right. Somewhere during the past year of building Morrison Enterprises into a global force, I'd stopped caring about what people thought of my success and started caring about what kind of impact that success could have. "Elena, can I ask you something? When you first decided to support me after that disastrous presentation 7 years ago, what did you see that made you think I was worth the investment?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, considering her answer carefully. "I saw someone who cared more about solving problems than about looking successful while solving them. Most entrepreneurs I meet are primarily motivated by ego. They want to be seen as visionary leaders, celebrated innovators, disruptive forces. But you were focused on actually making things work, even when no one was watching. And now? Now I see someone who's learned to use success as a tool, rather than treating it as a destination. You understand that power is only meaningful when it's used to create opportunities for others." The observation struck me as profound. For most of my life, I'd seen success as something to achieve and then protect. But Morrison Enterprises had taught me that real success was dynamic, something that had to be continuously earned through the positive impact it created. There's something I've been meaning to tell you, Elena continued. Next month, I'm announcing the Elena Vasquez Foundation for Entrepreneurial Innovation. It's endowed with $200 million, and its mission is to identify and support entrepreneurs who've been overlooked by traditional funding sources. Elena, that's incredible. Who will run it? She smiled with the satisfaction of someone who'd been planning a surprise for months. I was hoping you might consider serving as the foundation's first chairman. Morrison Enterprises has proven that unconventional entrepreneurs can create extraordinary value when given proper support. I want you to help identify the next generation of innovators who just need someone to believe in their impossible dreams. The offer was both humbling and terrifying. It meant expanding my responsibilities beyond Morrison Enterprises to become an advocate for entrepreneurs worldwide. It meant using my platform not just to build wealth, but to create opportunities for people who faced the same rejection and dismissal I'd experienced 7 years ago. I'm honored by your confidence, I said, but I want to make sure I can do justice to that kind of responsibility. Jake, you've already done justice to it. Morrison Enterprises employs over 3,000 people across 17 countries. Your technology has helped more than 50,000 small businesses increase their revenue. The Global Impact Initiative will bring economic opportunities to communities that have been ignored by traditional development programs. You're already changing the world. The foundation would just formalize your commitment to helping others do the same. As I considered Elena's proposal, I realized that my journey from failed entrepreneur to global technology leader had come full circle. 7 years ago, I'd been the overlooked innovator with impossible dreams and no one willing to believe in them. Now I had the opportunity to become for other entrepreneurs what Elena had been for me, the person who sees potential where others see only risk. Yes, I said finally. I'd be honored to serve as chairman of the foundation. Elena's smile was radiant. Excellent. Our first initiative will be identifying entrepreneurs in developing economies who are using technology to address local challenges. I want to find people who are building solutions from the bottom up, the way you did with Morrison's original platform. As we sat beneath the stars, planning a foundation that would support dreamers and innovators around the world, I thought about the young man who'd walked out of the Meridian Ventures building 7 years ago, with his confidence shattered and his future uncertain. That man had believed his story was ending. He'd thought that failure was permanent, that rejection was final, that some dreams were simply too big for the people who dared to dream them. But he'd been wrong about everything except the dreams themselves. The dreams had been real. They'd just been waiting for him to become worthy of them. And for the first time in my life, I knew exactly who I was meant to be. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.